Review of Chapter 9, which is the nutrients involved in bone health. Now the first section talks about bones themselves, and you'll need to read up on that. Bone is a connective tissue that is made of bone cells and a bone matrix. The bone matrix is made of collagen fibers mineralized with calcium phosphate to give it hardness and flexibility. The picture in your book that shows the sectional view of the bone, you've got the compact bone around the outside, also known as cortical bone, and inside you have these irregular spaces with spongy bone. In life, the spongy bone is filled with red bone marrow, whereas that cavity in the middle may be filled with yellow bone marrow. Red bone marrow is for blood-forming tissues. Now, bone cells include osteoblasts and osteoclasts, and they do opposite things. One of them takes up calcium, one of them lays down calcium. So you have this two-sided action for bone remodeling, which is necessary for bones to keep their matrix fresh. It's necessary for bone growth, for bone repair, things like that. It's known as bone remodeling. Now, the bone density, of course, is the measure of bone health, and the normal trend of bone density is that it gradually increases with age until around 30 or so, then peaks around there, and then pushing 40, it gradually declines with age. So osteoporosis prevention, which is what most of this chapter is about, begins where you're at now. It doesn't begin later. So Roman numeral 2, assessing bone health using the DXA or DEXA, dual X-ray energy absorptiometry. It compares one's bone density to that of a healthy 30-year-old and yields a T-score, and the T-score compares your bone density to that of a healthy 30-year-old. So 0 would be that healthy 30-year-old. Positive numbers would be higher bone density. Negative numbers would be lower bone density. Now, between +1, 0, and -1 is considered normal. Between -1 and -2.5 is considered abnormally low, and clinical osteoporosis is a T-score below -2.5. Now, first and foremost among the nutrients is calcium involved in bone health. 99% of the calcium in your body is in the form of calcium phosphate in your bones, but that 1% circulates as the calcium electrolyte. It's needed for all kinds of physiology, including muscle contraction. Your body maintains tight control over blood calcium balance through hormones, namely calcitonin and PTH. They both work in opposite ways, controlling absorption rate by the intestines, excretion rate by the kidneys, and of course the bones will serve as a reservoir for blood calcium if need be. So in other words, if the diet is deficient in calcium, the blood calcium will be normal, but the bones will take the hit. Now, your notes and your book give you adequate intake values for calcium and where to get calcium. So be sure to look over those numbers. Calcium, of course, is abundant in milk, but it's also found in certain types of fish in which the bones are consumed, such as anchovies and sardines. There are certain plant-based foods that contain calcium as well, although it's a little bit harder to absorb. Now, fortified materials can also have it as well. Fortified drinks, fortified foods can have calcium added to it. Supplements are also sources of calcium. Just make sure that you don't consume more than 500 milligrams at a time, because you can only absorb about that much at once. Now, too much calcium, usually you excrete what you don't need or you fail to absorb what you don't need, but of course that limit can be exceeded. Too little calcium sets the body up for low bone density. Vitamin D, however, is a sterol or steroid. You can also make it by going into the sun. Now, in your notes, I talk about vitamin D synthesis, and it's all a matter of sun exposure and skin pigmentation and age. Okay, so where one lives, how old the person is, that sort of thing. So be sure to read over that material. Vitamin D is found in vitamin D fortified milk. Again, fortified means the nutrient was added; it wasn't naturally present. So not too many foods naturally contain vitamin D. Now, vitamin D toxicity is not all that well documented, although it can raise blood calcium level. Vitamin D deficiency is rickets, but in adults, rickets is known as osteomalacia. Vitamin K's main job is in blood clotting. It'll be mentioned in chapter 10 as well as this chapter. It does play a role in bone remodeling, which is why it's included here. Vitamin K is also manufactured in part by the bacteria in the large intestine. It's also very abundant in many vegetables. Phosphorus as phosphate, again, widespread in foods. This was covered in the previous, or one of the previous chapters. Not much new to add there. Magnesium is also a component of bone matrix. It's also a component of a cofactor for many enzymes of the body, so it does play a role in bone health. Magnesium, of course, can be found in many foods such as nuts and seeds and even seafood or dark chocolate. Fluoride, as most people know, is for the teeth. What fluoride does is it replaces the hydroxy groups of the hydroxyapatite, making the teeth more resistant to acid from bacterial decomposition of candy in the mouth and so forth. Fluoride, of course, is found in fluoridated water, but it also is provided through topical application. Excessive fluoride produces what's called fluorosis of the teeth in children. A deficiency in fluoride just makes a person more susceptible to tooth decay. The last part of the chapter discusses osteoporosis, abnormal low bone density. Be sure to look over risk factors, diet low in vitamin D and calcium and these other nutrients. Physical activity plays a role because the bones are only going to be as strong as they need to be, so physical exercise is helpful for bone density. Other things play a role as well. But again, good nutrition and being physically active can help with bone density. There are prescription medications that also can reverse bone density loss. And that pretty much concludes the review of Chapter 9.